For every new product or service, there's always someone behind the scene whose job it is to get people using it. And while every entrepreneur expects people to hear about their new product and react like this, the process of changing customer behaviour is actually more often like this. And that's because we're all creatures of habit. The human brain is actually quite lazy and it likes to save time and energy wherever possible, especially when we're buying stuff. In a 1974 paper, Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky spoke about how our brains use mental shortcuts known as heuristics to facilitate problem solving and decision making. Heuristics are basically rules of thumb that help us reduce the cognitive burden of making decisions or even automating them altogether. Basically, they increase the efficiencies of our brain. The problem for marketers is that consumers use heuristics to help guide the majority of their purchasing decisions. It's why brand preference and brand loyalty are so important for companies. Once a consumer likes your product, they'll probably keep using it until something happens to disrupt their decision making. Now, of course, that isn't true for all products, particularly really expensive ones. But for most of those day-to-day products that we use, we normally find a preferred brand and we like to stick to it. And that's where behaviour change marketing comes into play. Behaviour change is a specific field of marketing that aims to disrupt heuristic decision making and encourage new types of behaviour. For the most part, behavioural change marketing is about achieving one of three possible outcomes: stop consumers doing an existing behaviour, get them to start a new behaviour, or convince them to modify legacy behaviour. And in some cases, marketers want to achieve all three of these. It really just depends on the context. For example, a bread making company might release a new type of loaf. A marketer is then asked to find ways to convince customers to stop buying the same old bread that they've used for however long and facilitate or trial a new type of bread. It's quite a big ask. Behaviour change is also used really heavily in the social marketing space, such as reducing smoking or helping increase engagement with climate change. In Australia, we actually have some really fantastic academics in this space, like Professor Linda Brennan, who, along with a number of other academics, actually authored a kind of Bible on social marketing and behaviour change in 2014. But that's for another video, which we'll come back to at another time. To get people to change their behaviours, marketers first need to understand when decisions are actually made, and this is known as the customer decision journey. The decision journey goes all the way back to 1910, when John Dewey identified 5 core phases that customers typically go through before they make a purchase. Let's use pizza as an example. In the first stage, a consumer might feel hungry and decide they need to order something because they don't have any food around the house. The first stage is known as the problem or need recognition. Following that, the consumer starts looking for information on what types of fast food is available. This is known as the information search. Once they've narrowed it down to a couple of options, maybe Japanese, burgers and pizza, they'll then reevaluate their alternatives and make a final decision. At that point, they purchase the pizza and wait for it to arrive. Once the pizza arrives, it might not have all the toppings they expected and maybe it was a little cold. And so they contact the pizza house to make a complaint. This is known as the post-purchase phase. Now, for most people, this might seem like a really obvious process, and you might be asking to yourself, do we really need a whole school of research for this? But for behaviour change marketers, the decision process has rich opportunities to stop the customers from buying their pizza and instead potentially buy KFC or McDonald's or a salad. It's all how you think about it. At the strategic level, the customer journey has numerous points where marketers can disrupt consumers and encourage them down a certain path. Their current state, in our example, is being hungry. Their desired state is to have a belly full of pizza. The future state, which is having a belly full of pizza, but potentially not feeling satisfied because the pizza was cold. And finally, we then have the revised state, which in our case is an angry customer because their pizza wasn't warm. As customers transition through each of these states, marketers have an opportunity to disrupt them. First, in terms of creating a stimulus. In our example, maybe the reason that the consumer recognised their hunger in the first place is because they saw an ad for pizza. The second disruption point is during the research phase, and that may be driven by search engine optimization or maybe paid sponsorship on the app used to buy the food. And then finally, the actual experience is a huge opportunity to disrupt customers, particularly future customers. There's a whole school of research on the value of service recovery and how to turn customer complaints into sales opportunities. But again, we'll leave that for another video. So how can research help marketers in their disruption efforts? Well, the obvious one is profiling what happens in each stage of the customer journey and determining where disruption opportunities might occur. The problem is that this type of journey mapping typically only tells us the what's behind consumer decisions. It doesn't necessarily tell us the whys. Why do people choose certain products over others? Why do they like certain brands, and so on and so forth? And that's where we need to dig a bit deeper. A lot of research has been done into decision typologies and the motivations behind different types of products. Now, while these are great models for practitioners, I often find it overcomplicates things a little bit. In my experience, there are two main modes that can really help us understand the drivers of consumer decisions. The first is Hawkins-Stern's impulse buying theory, which really talks about all of those spur of the moment purchases that are really just driven by an impulse reaction to some sort of stimuli, such as grabbing a chocolate bar at the checkout for no other reason than that you saw the chocolate and, well, who doesn't love chocolate? The second model is Arjan's theory of planned behaviour. The theory of planned behaviour is really relevant for change marketers because it provides a framework to understand the deep cognitive factors that drive consumer decisions. It also provides parameters that help us guide change. Underpinning the model is the belief that individual decision making is based on your cultural and personal values. And this dates back to research conducted by Carl Jung, which was then refined by academics like Geert Hofstede in the second half of the 20th century. These values manifest into three core pillars: attitudes, which are of course your specific opinions on any given topic; subjective norms, which are broadly speaking socially acceptable behaviours or expectations; and then finally perceived behavioural controls, which really refers to whether or not a consumer feels they have the permission or the ability to actually make certain decisions. The theory of planned behaviour ultimately states that consumers need to have positive predispositions on all three of these pillars in order to change their behaviours. Research is a really effective tool for understanding these three pillars and how they impact your purchase drivers in the market. By understanding each of these areas, it's much easier for marketers to build strategies that will effectively disrupt consumers throughout their journey and create the impetus to change their behaviours. If you're interested in learning more about how research can help support behaviour change, then reach out or leave a comment on the video. Also, leave a like, it's super helpful. Keep listening, keep learning, and most of all, keep eating pizza.